Good morning and welcome to Waters Ironworks. I'm Philip Waters and we're out at the lovely Pioneer Farms here in Austin today. We're going to be looking at making two different punches that I think are kind of the first punches anyone should look at making, some of the very first tools anyone should make because they come in useful time after time. We're going to be looking at a center punch. The center punch here is designed to punch marks in cold steel. So anytime you're doing measurements, laying things out where you need to be able to measure it after it comes out of the fire and know where to strike, center punch is going to be your friend. The second one is a round punch, and this round punch is used for punching holes in material. So we're going to be using both of these in the 2.0 project that we're working on, making a hook and chain links. This will be used to mark out the measurements for the different parts of our hook, and this will be used to punch the hole that will eventually become the eye on the hook. So we'll take a look at how to make both of these. These are both from Mark Asbury's book, Fundamentals of Blacksmithing, a wonderful book, and he walks you through every step of the way. In order to make these, I'm going to take 3/4 inch and about 7 inches long of a medium carbon steel 4142. I want these tools to hold up for a while. They're going to be punching into mild steel predominantly, and so this 4142 is a great tough steel that's pretty easy to work with. If you're not familiar with working with a lot of higher carbon steels beyond mild steel, 4142 is pretty forgiving. It's also water quenching steel, which makes it nice. You don't have to worry about quenching it in oil. So let's get these bars into the fire. We'll start getting them hot. We're going to work on the back end of the bar of the punch first, and then we'll move on to the front end. So I've got my pieces of steel warming up in the fire. These are medium carbon steel, and there are a couple things I need to pay attention to as opposed to a mild, very low carbon steel. One is that these have a lower burning temperature. So I want to make sure that I am not getting these too hot. And those are starting to look pretty good right there. Getting these up to the same temperature that I would mild steel, I'm going to start burning them. When you see those sparks coming up off of it and exploding, that's the carbon in the steel burning away. I'm using a medium carbon steel here. I want to keep as much of that in as I can. The other thing that I need to watch for is as I'm forging it, the more carbon is in steel, the more likely it is to start cracking if it gets cold. So I can't get these as hot as I would mild steel, and I also have to stop working them before they get as cold as I could potentially work with mild steel. So let's pull the first one out of the fire here and start working on our struck end. So I'm going to come to the anvil. You can see there's a little bit of beeswax, it looks like, on the anvil here, so it may flare up on us. And I'm going to put a lazy square in. So just on the back end here, come in, give it some blows, rotate 90 degrees, give it a few more blows. I don't really have the best tongs for these, so it's going to jump around a little bit on me. All I'm looking for in this first heat is to start squaring it up. I'm going to take this to an octagon, so I'm not worried about really getting in there and getting sharp corners. So I'll leave a little bit there. When I heat this up again, I'll come in on that diamond and take these to a full octagon. But that's looking pretty good for what I need for a first heat. Same thing on the second one here. You can see I'm taking that back, inch and a half, something around there. Again, Just taking it to a lazy square that doesn't have real sharp corners. If you haven't done a lot of work with higher carbon steels or potentially thicker stock like this, you may find that it takes a fair bit more work than you're used to in order to get this to move. So some good heavy blows in there will help the process along. All right, we've got that hot. We're going to bring it here to the anvil, start knocking those corners in and making it into an octagon. While the bar is hot, it can definitely be a little challenging to see exactly where those faces are. So you may take a heat or two, let it cool down a little bit so you can see where you need to keep working on it. And if you're a little off, it's not going to make a huge difference. It is looking pretty good. Some of my faces are, it might have got an extra face in there. All right, I'm reasonably happy with that. I'm going to grab the second one, do the same thing. So again, in on the corners, and away we go. The next thing I'm going to do as I pull these out of the fire is go in and put a chamfer on the corners, the top corners. So I'm going to take them and just knock them in a little bit. The reason for that is if you look at this tool, for example, you can see that the end of it is swollen out and it's starting to develop cracks in it. This is called mushrooming, and it gets pretty dangerous. As this gets mushroomed out, you get little cracks in here. You go and you strike this tool with a hammer, and little pieces of steel can fly off that at high speeds, which can injure you. So we always want to make sure that any tool we've got, we're keeping it nicely dressed and you don't get a lot of mushrooming on it. That chamfer, by knocking those corners in just a little bit, it's going to help make sure that as you strike that tool, it's got longer to go before it starts mushrooming out, a little bit longer to go before you have to clean it up. It will also help make sure that any blow you do is going to be more centered on that tool. So it'll help you a little bit with making sure that your blows are going straight into it. You're not hitting off center. So let's look at how that works. So I've got it good and hot. I'm going to bring it to the far side of the anvil. I'm just going to tap it in. Working my way around the bar here. And you can see I'm starting to put about a 45-degree angle on this, knocking it in. What it also winds up doing is creating a bit of a divot there in the middle. The center of the steel likes to move more slowly than the outside edge that I'm hitting does. I can clean that up some by forcing it down into the anvil, upsetting that back in. You can go back and forth with this a few times, heating it up and cooling it, heating it up, knocking the edges in, and then upsetting it, but I think overall I'm pretty happy with that. There we go. Nice chamfered corners on that. we'll put this in the fire and start heating it up and do the second one. All right, those are just about hot, so let's take a look at the next step on a finished product. We've got our back end here pretty well cleaned up. The next thing we're going to do is put a bit of an index right here. The idea is that as you're holding this tool, you're going to be able to know which direction it's facing. For the center punch and the round punch that we're making today, they're both symmetrical, so it doesn't make a huge difference. If we're doing something like a hot cut or anything where it is not just a dot or a circle on the end, being able to tell how that's lined up is very important. So we'll come in and just working over the edge of the anvil, on the horn of the anvil, we'll go in and we'll put in this indexing. Give you a nice little spot to hold this as you're working with it. If you've got a rounding hammer, now would be a great time to use it so that it kind of mirrors up a little bit better than this cross-peen hammer does with the anvil, so you've got round shapes on both sides. But if all you've got is a cross-peen hammer, which I know a lot of folks do, it will work just fine. So I'm going to come here to the horn of the anvil, a little ways down the bar. Just start putting in a bit of a dent. Work on one side, flip it over. Work on the other side here. I'm going to go back and forth and try and keep these relatively even. I don't need to get these too thick, or I'm sorry, too thin. Just a bit of an indentation there. Bring it to the anvil. Straighten that out a little bit. I think that's looking okay. I may not be perfectly symmetrical there, but that is not a problem. All right, I like the way that one looks. Let's grab the second one and do the same thing. At this point, I am done with this end of the steel, so I'm actually going to flip this around and put in the other side of the steel when I'm heating it up now. Number 2 is done, and we'll do the same thing and flip around which end we're getting hot. All right, we've got the steel hot. We're getting ready to work on the business ends of these, and these are going to be different, so I'll show you guys on each of them how we're going to do the process. I think we'll probably start with the center punch first, and then we'll make the second one the round punch. So I'm going to come here to the far side of the anvil. I'm going to put a sharp taper on here. I want to keep this kind of as short as I can. This center punch is going to be punching into cold steel, and so I want to make sure that the point has as much steel backing it up as possible. And so a nice short sharp taper will help with that. If I really drew this out long, then this center punch would have a tendency to bend on me as I was using it. We're starting to get down into a low red heat here. Because this is a medium carbon steel, I want to be careful with it. I am actually going to go ahead and put this back in the fire and heat it up, and we'll finish that point on our second heat. Round punch, pretty similar, but we're going to take a little bit longer of a taper here. I always like to start with my point, so I'm going to focus there. Let's put that back in the fire, get it hotter, make this a little easier on us. All right, we're back on our center punch, taking that nice short taper. We want to bring this all the way to a point. Just keep working it here. Trying to hit just on the very tip here. Get that lined up. So I'm pretty happy with how that point is looking. I'm going to go and do some file work or grinding work to clean it up. I am going to take my taper here on one of these facets that lines up with my indentation and just work that back. This is really just kind of an aesthetic thing. I think they just look a little more attractive if you take this indentation, you just run a line along it down to the point of your tool. So, doesn't need to be anything crazy, just a little bit of an indication here that I've kind of thought the whole way through here. So, next step on this, and in the interest of time, I'm probably going to go to the grinder, but we'll show you how that is I'm going to grind in an even steeper angle right here up on the end. So I'm going to set this aside, let it start cooling down so that I can work with it on the grinder, and we'll grind that point in. If you don't have a grinder and all you've got is some files, you can do the exact same thing with files. In that case, I would probably get it back up into a red heat and put it in the vise and file it, and do hot filing with that rather than letting it cool down. All right. On to the center punch. So let's work on that point some more. It's starting to get a little raggedy up there at the front end. Set it back in on itself a little bit. Straighten that end up. And I don't want to take this all the way down to a sharp point here. Right, this is going to be punching through hot steel. I need a little bit of beefiness in there so that it doesn't get too hot while it's doing that. So we're going to take this down to, you know, somewhere around there, maybe a hair smaller. Really the determining factor here on how much of a point I want on this is going to be how big of a hole I'm going to need to punch. So it would not be unusual to make 3 or 4 of these potentially with different diameter holes on the back end in order to punch those. Let's heat this up again. It's medium carbon steel. I want to be careful at the temperature I'm working on it. We'll flatten out the front here with a little bit of upsetting, and then we'll draw this out so it's got a nice taper. All right, we've got this hot, so we're gonna just work on taking this back a little ways. I want a nice, long, smooth taper here from the point. Let's actually go in and clean up that ragged front end. It's looking nice and square now. Now I'm going to work on that nice, even taper. I will take a few heats to do this. You can see we're starting to draw it out, and I do want a reasonable length on there. As this punches through, I want a relatively shallow angle, and I want it to be very smooth. Any bumps or lumps that you've got in it are going to make it harder to drive through that piece of steel. So very smooth angles. We'll actually clean this up either with a file or a grinder to get it as smooth as possible. Hot again, we'll continue working on this taper. What I'm looking for as I turn it here, it's just anywhere where there's a change in the angle. So for example, right here, I've got one angle, then it changes angles. So I'm going to give it some blows there to try and smooth all that out. This is starting to look pretty good here. So we're going to heat this up again since it's starting to get a little cool on the end. Back into the fire, and we'll make this into an octagon, and then we'll start rounding it out. And you can see I've got, I don't know, what is that, 2.5, 3 inches or so squared up into a point. Again, like the center punch, I don't want to get this too thin, or as I'm punching through steel, it's going to heat up on me very quickly. The temper is going to get messed up, and that end is going to get hot and tend to mushroom instead of punching cleanly. So leave a little bit of chunkiness in there on it. All right, we've got it hot. We're going to come in here on the diamond. I like to start on the back. Some heavy hammer blows, lightening up as I move forward. Starting to establish my octagon. Now we'll come in, just work our way around this, knocking off all the high points here. I'm giving it relatively light hammer blows, so I'm comfortable working a little bit cooler using that planishing technique than I normally would with a medium carbon steel. A little tricky holding these in the tongs. Take a look at that and see if it looks relatively straight to us. I am a little offset, so I'm going to take one more heat and just try and make sure that this is all lined up nice and straight here. So I've got a little bit of unevenness here. Just going to try and give it a few blows to straighten all that out. What I really want is for everything to be lined up dead center in all the different directions. You got to be careful when you're doing this, right? Because it tapers, if I hammer it this way in order to get it centered, I'm going to knock it off the other side, then I'll look at it and I'll do the same thing going back and forth. So light hammer blows as you're doing the corrections, and check it pretty frequently. It's looking pretty good. I'm going to carefully give it a few taps here just to smooth out a few rough spots. The smoother I can get it with the hammer, the less file work I'm going to have to do to clean this up. So pays to take a little bit of time in this step. All right, that is looking pretty good to me. For this one, I'm going to show you guys how the hot filing will work. I'm going to put this in, get it up into a red, maybe low orange sort of heat, take it over, put it in the vise, and then we'll smooth it out with a file. All right, we've got a good heat on this. We're going to come over, drop it in the vise here. And clamp it on our flattened section. And then come in and just start working my way around it. So you'll notice I'm only scraping as I push forward on it. Files do have a direction. You don't want to work your way backwards. You always want to push forward, lift it up, and then go back. Just coming in here and trying to take off any of those edges. This does mess your files up pretty good. Files are a very high carbon steel or hard steel most of the time, potentially just case hardened. And getting these teeth hot while you're working on a piece of steel like this will mess your file up a little bit. So I would recommend having one set of files for your hot work and a different set for your cold work. Even though we're at a black heat here, we can keep working. Be okay. It's looking pretty good. So I've cleaned up all the edges on this. This is looking pretty good now. I've cleaned up all the edges on it. Went in and helped round that up a little bit. It looks pretty smooth here. Obviously you could go even further with this, really get it very smooth, taking it to a grinder or a belt grinder. Stone or belt grinder would really make it a pretty easy job. But For some hand filing, I'm pretty happy with that. Let's go get our center punch cleaned up, and then both of these will be ready for hardening and tempering. All right, welcome to the back of the shop here. It's a little less $18.99 back here than it is up front. I've got my stone grinder, and I'm just going to work on that to get the point. So what I want to do is take this and knock it in at the end. I'm also going to grind it flat here and just clean up that rag first. So we've got a good flat point on it. Now I'm going to come in and just work the edges of that in so that we've got our center punch. So that's looking pretty reasonable there. It's got a little bit of a twist in it, but that's not going to cause any problems. You'll notice that I brought it in, again, at an even steeper angle. And rather than ending in a very sharp point, I've ground the very tip of it off there. So I've got just a small little tip right there. And I've got as much steel as possible behind it. That'll give it the strength as I'm hammering this into cold steel. To hold up and not wind up bending or mushrooming out on me. This one now is ready for the quench as well. Because I haven't cleaned up with a file this one so much, I'm going to come in on the wire wheel here and clean it up a little bit so that when we're getting ready for our eventual tempering, I don't have a whole lot of scale on there. All right, we've got that all cleaned up. Let's go get it hot and we'll be ready to quench it. So we're just about up to temperature with our round punch here. That looks like it's about right. So let's talk a little bit while that soaks in the fire about the heat treating process. So what we want to do is get our steel up past its critical temperature where there's a phase change in the molecules, and then go in and quench it. With this 4142 and these tools, we're going to quench it in water. If you're using something even higher carbon steel, or you wanted it a little bit tougher and a little less hard, you might quench in oil. You can tell if you're up to the right temperature. If you have a magnet, this is sticking to the magnet pretty well here. This hot steel, when it's ready for a quench, will not stick to that metal. So we'll pull it out of the fire. Doesn't stick. Bring it over here. Into the water. Swirl this around. We want to make sure that we don't just plunge it in and leave it in one spot. It'll create a steam jacket around it, which will prevent the water from cooling it down as quickly as we need. So some vigorous swirling around. All right, this is good and cool, and it is very hard at this point. So we are going to need to come in and temper this. Let's go ahead and harden our center punch first. And then we'll temper both of these. All right, we're up at temperature. We are certainly non-magnetic. Come here to the quench tub. All right, so we've got both of these good and hard. I'm going to take these back to the wire wheel, just clean them up, get all the scale off there, make sure I've got some nice shiny surfaces. So the hardening, there's a delicate balance kind of between the hardness and the toughness. The harder steel it is, the more brittle it is, the more energy you have to put into breaking it, but when you do break it, it tends to just fail completely. Right after a quench, this is very hard. It's a little harder than what I really need. So what we're going to do is heat this back up and bring it up to about 300, 350, get it to a straw color, and then we'll quench it one more time. That tempering process, slowly heating it back up to a lower heat, pulls a little bit of the hardness out of it, but it also introduces more toughness into it. So we're trying to find that balance we want between how hard the tool is and how resistant to breaking it is, how tough it is. So let me go clean these up and I'll be right back. All right, we've got this cleaned up. We can see the nice shiny steel here. And what we're gonna do now is go in and temper it. So I'm gonna use the torch here, heat this up down in here, let the heat creep up into the tip. And when this tip gets to a straw color, I'm gonna grab it with a pair of tongs and quench it again, cool it down. As this heats up, what we should start seeing is that the steel is going to oxidize. At the higher temperatures in the 650, 700 range, we're going to get a peacock blue. And then in the lower ranges, get some different colors going down into kind of a straw golden color. That straw is really what I want to see creep up all the way here to the end. I am starting further back in the tool. I don't need this part to be so hard, and I want to make sure that I've got an even heating of the point of the steel rather than just bringing the surface of it up to that 350 degree range. Good lighting in here certainly makes a big difference. So I can see that color starting to come up, turning a little bronzy in there. So I'm going to lay off the heat and let that straw color creep up on its own so I don't overshoot this. I don't know if it's coming through on the camera or not, but you should be able to see that it's a little bit of a bronze down there and then more silvery up above it. Let's give that just a little more heat here. All right, that looks like it's at the right temperature. Let's go ahead and quench this. Might have overshot it a little bit there, we'll have to see. You can see kind of that peacock blue color in here where it got the hottest, fading into some of the more brown colors there. We're gonna go ahead and call this one done though. Let's work on the tempering for the center punch and you guys will be good to go. All right, I grabbed a second torch to help this one go a little bit faster. So let's get it hot. It's looking like it's turning a little golden to me up there on the tip. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up and quench it. There we go. So we've got our center punch here and our punch here ready to go to make the hook project or any of a wide variety of projects. If you've got any questions, please drop them in the comments and I will respond to all the ones I respond to. Once again, thanks for joining us out here. I'm Philip and we are at the lovely Pioneer Farms. See you guys again soon.